So my name is Brian Barr. I am the Associate Director of Career Development with the Schar School of Policy and Government. And today we're going to be talking about federal job search strategies. Um, and so first thing, some line items to cover. You're going to hear a familiar phrase in the coming weeks, months, and what have you. These are somewhat unprecedented times. And so, it's very difficult for us to foresee what might happen next, just given the different kind of executive orders and what impacts those have had in terms of federal hiring currently. That said, this rapidly changing environment does have a couple of impacts right now for you as federal applicants. Because of the hiring freeze, there is obviously not really positions being posted in USA Jobs, much less throughout the federal government. This potentially will end in April, but there is the chance that it could get extended depending on a variety of different factors that not really many people have any kind of control over. And so just keep in mind that as I'm describing these strategies, these kind of different opportunities to you as we're going through the kind of strategies here, just realize that these things can change. The potential for the hiring freeze to be extended does exist. There's also potential of a government shutdown. And so what that will do is, like a hiring freeze, it will prohibit people from being able to be hired into federal positions. Now, there are going to be some distinctions between kind of what is a necessary, position that would traditionally be furloughed. There are going to be differences between kind of what you will have as a typical kind of like furloughed position within federal government, ones that are not to report into work, much less be able to work on anything federally funded. There are other kind of necessary positions, things like with the FAA and with the other national security positions that require some degree of security clearance. Those are typically excluded from a government shutdown or hiring freeze process. That said, security clearance processes also get delayed during government shutdown. So it's important to recognize that if you do end up securing a position that requires security clearance, there is the potential that the shutdown would prohibit the GSA from running your fingerprinting and being able to move that SF-86 form along. So nothing to worry about right now, but just kind of understanding that a possible government shutdown would also have impacts on a federal hiring process. That all said, the strategy is going to remain the exact same. You can build your experience and you're going to apply with a purpose. You're going to be looking at the different opportunities within federal service, within federal contracting, and a number of these different kind of entities with the intention of developing your governmental experience as well as your skills that will be necessary in that career. So that out of the way, we're going to talk first about kind of what opportunities and benefits you can expect with federal service, and then we're going to jump into the process of how do you navigate that overall process of applying. So first thing, you do have the opportunity to make a difference. Federal service is a lot of things, and it does have this very large, bureaucratic, slow-moving kind of experience that you can expect, but it also allows you to affect change on a national level. So you are also able to help kind of direct that influence for the country. And so the different policies that are implemented, the different legislation that goes through the House and the Senate and the executive office, all these different things you are able to have some degree of impact on. And traditionally, you are able to enjoy a healthy work-life balance. For the most part, it isn't any situation where this is not considered at-will employment. You are able to kind of, draw some lines based on kind of like what your work is and how you conduct that. Federal pay and advancement, typically they pay on a general schedule. So the GS scale, and you will likely, if you've seen any of the different kind of applications, you will see that it says, GS 9 to 12, or it might say GS 5 or GS 7. That stands for general schedule, and it's going to be on a scale of 1 to 15. And each level of that scale is going to have 10 steps. And so each of those have kind of like incremental increases in salary and, general kind of experience required. But the important thing to keep in mind is that, traditionally, you are going to be paid an appropriate rate for kind of like what your experience is, your educational background, so on and so forth. And that is the kind of general schedule they put you into. They take all that information, all your technical skills, your experiences, your education. They kind of put that into the blender and they say, this is kind of what you would be scaled at. this is exactly what we would pay you on our general schedule. This is going to vary by geographic location, much like you can kind of assume a place in like Stoughton, Wisconsin, that none of you have probably heard of before, is not going to have as high a salary as a place like Washington, D.C. So this does vary by geographic location. Cost of living is obviously going to have impacts on this. But just keep that in mind as you kind of look at some of the different kind of salary ranges, which are going to be very wild. It might be something like 60,000 to 145,000. I've never seen anybody get the top 10% of what that salary range is. Generally speaking, it's within that bottom 10%. But there's also a lot of opportunity for advancement within federal positions. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as well. And so, like I just said, within a few years, you can generally speaking progress through several grades within good reason. Like you're not going to go from a GS5 to a GS15, but you might be able to progress from a GS5 to say a GS7 or a GS9 within say 3 to 5 years. And so that would be a generally speaking acceptable amount of kind of advancement. So there are other benefits to federal service. There's a student loan repayment assistance program. And this is going to be based on, prior data. I'm not sure if there have been any impacts on these available benefits for federal employees as of right now. But it's something important to keep in mind. When you are offered a position, you can inquire about some of these different kind of offers of assistance, student loan repayments. There's also relocation assistance occasionally. There's a number of ways that you might be able to kind of be granted some additional assistance or finances to be able to kind of help get you into those positions. Generally speaking, they aren't going to do hiring bonuses or anything like retention bonuses. Just traditionally, federal positions don't typically do that. But typically speaking, there are also flexible schedules and generous vacation time. Generous vacation time is likely not to change as they're not going to go from say 25 days a year to 5. That would be considered a bit of an overreaction by any kind of executive order or any other kind of thing like that. So I think there are some things to keep in mind that generally speaking, all of this information will become absolutely clear when you are offered the position. If you are unclear on any of these different things, that's where you work with the hiring official or the individual who is kind of like helping process your paperwork to really kind of, elucidate a lot of this information, find out and make sure it's like, okay, so what can I expect in terms of time off, sick leave? Like, is there a potential for me to be able to use a flexible schedule? Would I be able to do, say, like 40 hours for the first 4 days of the week and then, have Fridays off from the weekend? So that's kind of what is typically meant by flexible schedules versus, say, like a hybrid workforce versus versus, say, just complete remote work. Training and professional development, traditionally, there is a whole bunch of different modules that help build your technical skills within the federal government. It's kind of like federal university. And so there will be a lot of opportunities to develop skills in, say, program management, leadership development, and a number of those other kind of very important skills for federal service. And they also do offer various trainings throughout the course of the year. So there's a lot of really good opportunities to help develop yourself professionally so you don't feel like you're typically stagnating as you go through this process. And then competitive health and retirement benefits. Federal pension is very good. You can also, of course, do your anyway, you can do a number of different types of 401ks, or you can do a number of other different types of retirement plans. And then competitive health, obviously, they're talking about health insurance and like dental insurance, vision, all those different kind of things. And so those are all going to be very helpful in terms of they're going to be very good benefits, and they have been very good benefits for a very long time. And so you can expect to enjoy those same things. Before I continue further, if you do have any questions as I'm going through this presentation, you can feel free to enter those into the chat, and I'll try to address them as soon as I can. Okay, so to talk a little bit more about general schedule, and this is just going to be kind of the ranking system for kind of like what you would be typically you go in as. So GS5 typically for individuals who have 4 academic years above high school leading to a bachelor's degree or an earned bachelor's degree. And so if you say had completed your bachelor's degree in 5 years, If you did not complete your bachelor's degree, but you had those 4 years, you would typically, by this equation, be considered a GS5 level employee. And so the other thing that you'll see very frequently in a lot of these applications is education or equivalent experience. And so if you had, say, an associate's, but you also had 2 years very specialized experience in, say, like finance, in that case, you would still be eligible for the GS5 level because you have that equivalent experience. When you look at things like GS5 or GS7, excuse me, bachelor's degree with one of the following: class standing, upper third of the class, 3.0 or higher GPA, 3.5 or higher GPA in your major, or an honor society membership. I was a member of Psi-Chi in undergrad, the Psychology Honor Society, and so that would have made me eligible for GS7 when I completed my degree. GS9 is likely to be where most of you are at. And so typically you'll be eligible for a GS9 when you have attained your master's degree or equivalent, like 2 years graduate level education. So a JD would be considered the equivalent of that, and then some, because, typically those are 3-year programs. And then GS11 doctorate degree. And again, there's a lot of different kind of fluctuations, a lot of nuance to this, specifically because if you are getting a doctorate, but it takes you 7 years, you will still be doing very significant research on a very focused aspect of your field. So there's a whole bunch of different equations you could throw in there for, well, what's your data analysis experience? What's your ability to focus on the specific topic area? What's your subject matter expertise? There's a number of different ways that they would kind of evaluate GS11. But during the overall hiring process, that's typically what they're going to evaluate. Given all your education experience, technical skills, and prior responsibilities, where would you fit on this scale? But this is just kind of a very brief look at kind of like what all this looks like. So this is not the only slide that includes this information. So when you see 2011, just know that this is kind of where things were almost 14 years ago, almost 15. And so in Washington, D.C. at the GS5, you were getting about $34,075 a year. At GS9, $51,630. So cut to 2021, and you are looking at an increase of about $7,000, $9,000 in the case of the GS9. And then, in short order, so 10 years later, there was an increase of 9. 14 years later, there was an increase of about 13,000, 14,000. Or in the case of GS9, 17,000. So these salaries have increased, I wouldn't say exponentially. They have increased almost, by 50%. No, that's wrong too. They have increased vastly since the time of 2011. So it is important to understand that cost of living increases as well as just kind of like merit-based increases. Those are going to be a component of federal service as well. And so just to kind of go back to what I was talking about before with the different steps per schedule, here you see, this is kind of what it overall looks like between step 1 and step 10. So it's a $20,500 variance there. I have not heard of people getting hired in federal service where they've gotten any higher than, say, like a step 3. But this is all, again, going to be based on the criteria I mentioned before in terms of what they evaluate you at. So we're going to jump over to navigating the process now. It's also important to recognize that, in terms of kind of like where all these positions are, it's not just in the DC area. I would say about like a third of the overall positions for federal service exist in this one specific area in the DMV. But the vast majority of all these other positions are basically throughout the rest of the world. And so you would say there is a strong proportion of them that exist throughout the rest of the US. And then, of course, there's going to be the 1% to less than 1% that exist and work internationally. And so there's an important aspect of this that, you're not just held to specifically having to remain in this area. If you want to go back to your home state, there are still going to likely be different federal opportunities there as well. So navigating the process, it's important to start by narrowing your search. You don't necessarily want to just look at the entire open field and say, I'm going to apply for everything. Because, you might not necessarily have specialization in nuclear fission. And so for the most part, you're not going to work for any kind of like national laboratories around nuclear science. So it's important to kind of say narrow your scope to make sure that you're applying to the most applicable positions that really kind of afford you the best opportunity to be competitive. And so you're going to want to use these resources to help do that. So these are all based on kind of like the Partnership for Public Service. And there's a number of these different websites that will help narrow the search. So ourpublicservice.org, Go Government, Best Places to Work, USA Jobs. This is obviously where you're going to find a number of the different job postings. USA.gov, which is more or less just kind of like description of a number of the different kind of like government entities. And then individual agency websites. This would be if you are finding you're wanting to apply for like a CIA position, an FBI position, you want to do foreign service. These are the different ones that will require you to go directly to the organization's website, the department's website to be able to apply to them. So starting with gogovernment.org, this provides agency profiles, so it helps give a better understanding of like what would I be doing there. It also gives application and federal resume tips. And we're going to talk a little bit about federal resumes in a little bit, but also discusses security clearances information. So it gives you kind of like the scale, the ratings, to help kind of understand like what is going to be required, how much time should I expect my clearance process to be managed before I'm able to actually get cleared, whether or not they have the student loan repayment information, as well as kind of profiles on young vets. So another way you can help break this down is to say, okay, my background is more in the area of information technology and computer science. And so let's look at that, see which departments have those kind of opportunities. And truth be told, it's likely to be all of them because there's any number of different ways in which you'd be able to use IT and computer science. Otherwise, a lot of the individuals in this group might be more focused on like the administration of program management, in which case you'll be able to see the distribution of where all these employees are. And so government does a really good job basically saying, it's like, okay, so people in this area, will typically have this kind of degree or this kind of background, and this is typically where they're going to be going. So Partnership for Public Service is another outstanding resource. This provides kind of overviews of each of the agencies or departments. It also provides kind of a little bit more nuanced information. So like with this, Department of State, it says how many employees they typically will have, their budgetary resources, as well as where their top 5 employee locations are. US Suppress stands for basically they are, throughout the US, not in a specific, there's not like a major standing office in those areas. But you can see 239 in Virginia, DC 7,245. Obviously, the Department of State, that's where it is. But this also helps showcase kind of like, okay, well, if this is the department that's ultimately my focus, where should I look at basically living if this is what I want to do? It also provides helpful demographic information, like what kind of degrees are, comprise the vast majority of people who work for this agency. As you can see, a doctorate is a very small proportion of that. Master's is just a little bit south of what the bachelor's degree holders have. And so that's just an overall breakdown of basically everything you can find with that. I should say this also includes every position. So janitorial staff, as well as, financial, as well as, I believe, interns. So it just includes quite a bit of information. Best places to work is another way to get a little bit more granular with it. It looks at specific agencies within these different departments. So as you can see here, intelligence community is one of them. But what this tells you is kind of more like what their walk score is, if you will. And so it gives them a meta score based on the different evaluations they do on a number of different factors. So engagement and satisfaction score, it ranked 3 out of 17. And as you can see on this, the rankings above at the top of the page here, this has increased since 2016. And so this is helpful to kind of gain a better perspective of kind of like, okay, will I be engaged there well? The other thing you want to do, and I see it also has gone down since 2020, but there's a variety of different reasons that could be. If you look at, say, effective leadership empowerment, that's a scale that did go down, but a scale that has remained relatively plateaued is effective leadership in general. But if you're somebody who flourishes in environments where you're allowed to kind of like work independently and do kind of your own thing, then maybe working for an agency that teamwork is so important, which I would hope the intelligence community includes a very teamwork oriented kind of business. But if that is a area that you would prefer to kind of say avoid because you really like just focusing on things on your own, doing very independent work, then perhaps this isn't necessarily the industry or the specific agency for you. Cool. Uh, so USA.gov, again, you can get even more granular. And so as you can see here at the top or at the middle of the page, we're on the A profiles. The A to Z index of US government departments and agencies talks about even the specific offices, like the AbilityOne Commission. And so if you're somebody who would like to work with individuals with disability and be able to kind of provide programming as well as different support for those groups, AbilityOne Commission would be an outstanding focus for you. And by clicking on AbilityOne Commission, that will give you a better idea of like, okay, what does this office do? Who should I target when I am looking at applications on USA Jobs? Because we'll look at it in a second, but essentially it provides you a number of different filters. And one of them is offices or departments. And so you'll be able to actually look at those specific opportunities, add them to a saved search, and then be able to kind of just be notified when a position in that office would be made available. So getting started, for a lot of individuals, there are going to be opportunities for unpaid interns, paid internships, and then recent graduate positions. And these are under the Pathways programs. So the internship program is paid opportunities while you're still in school. And so you do have to be earning academic credit while you're going through this process. Otherwise, you essentially won't be included in that bucket of candidates. And then agencies, and this is not a guarantee, but agencies sometimes use this as a program as a pipeline approach to hiring. And so agencies that are able to might convert people, eligible participants, to full-time employment. So with that in mind, some of the best ways to utilize student programs within federal service is to kind of get a position within the year that you are graduating. So if you're graduating May of 2025, having an internship, say that fall or that spring, might net you an opportunity with the federal government within the office you had been working for. I have heard of some of our alumni doing this before, and there's a variety of different factors that either made it work or didn't. And so it's just something to kind of be aware of, more so than specifically say, this is exactly what I'm going to do. The recent graduate program is designed to essentially allow individuals who were not able to essentially get into an internship the opportunity to utilize 2 years post-graduation to be able to apply to these positions with a non-compete status. Now, the non-compete status for you means that you're only applying against other individuals who meet that same non-compete status. So you would only be applying against other individuals who had graduated within 2 years of applying to that position. This is a little bit different for veterans. They do have 6 years of eligibility for the recent graduates non-compete. But there's also veterans non-compete status as well. And so these are also different things you can look at filtering when you're looking at the jobs through USA Jobs. So where do you look for positions? 9 times out of 10, the reason it's highlighted is because that's going to be where you're going to find the vast majority of these opportunities. Occasionally, we will get notified from different employer partners at these different departments and agencies that, hey, just letting you know, we just made an application available on Handshake. Let your students know that they can apply through there. But generally speaking, what happens is they'll put the link to the actual application that you then get directed to. Even still, it's important to keep an eye on Handshake and set up a saved search just to be notified when opportunities in your specific search areas, search criteria are made available as well. Popular job in internship search engines. This could be like Indeed, LinkedIn. CareerShift is another opportunity, another way to kind of find these opportunities. But CareerShift is a web aggregator, so it pulls in information from USA Jobs as well. So for the most part, and if nobody knows what I'm talking about when I say CareerShift, I apologize. CareerShift is an opportunity that it is a web aggregator that you get access to for free because you are Mason students. Before we finish here, I'll make sure I put that in the chat just so that you have easy access to it. I'll link to it. But that will also pull in information from LinkedIn, Indeed, USA Jobs, company websites, pretty much anywhere. GoGovernment.org will occasionally have different positions they are highlighting. So that's another location that you can look at positions for. But like I said, USAJobs.gov is the main job site you'll be able to use. If you're applying for things like the FBI internship program or like the young professional programs at like the FBI or CIA, or you're looking at foreign service, you're looking at the specific department department websites. And so that's where you're going to want to make sure you're going if that is ultimately your goal. That said, if you have a specific agency or department in mind, I would suggest starting at their homepage and learning more about them as an agency so you can start building an idea of like what profile should I develop that would make me a very competitive candidate for this agency. So how to apply? I'm sure you have all applied to a position before. So I'm going to I'm with that assumption, I'm just going to briefly cover some of these different things. For the most part, the main thing I want to focus on is how to search for the specific positions within your kind of interest area or the specific kind of profiles that you would want to find through USA Jobs. Starting with USA Jobs, this is the landing page. You'll enter in your keywords and location. Typically, what I'll do is I will enter 0 keywords, and then I will enter in the location that I want to end up in. In this case, the DMV is totally fine, but what I would say is Washington, D.C. So once you have done that, it's going to pull up a list of however many jobs in that specific area. So regardless of what I just said, what I've chosen to do up here is enter in the keyword analyst, and then location leave completely blank. That's if you are more interested in just kind of like going, you don't care where you're going to end up. You just want to find an analyst position. So now that we have 926 positions with the tag of analyst on them. So, and as you can see, construction analysts is the vast majority of what these are, with program analysts at the very bottom. And so you're going to want to look at a couple of different things. First of all, just by looking at these, the different emblems they have on the right side of these boxes are what their non-compete statuses are, their hiring paths. This one right here, this blue one, this light blue one, that is open to the public. That means literally anybody can apply. And because it doesn't have any additional ones, that means that you are just competing against everybody without any special non-compete statuses kind of interfering with that process. Just below that, you can see that there are a number of different hiring paths they use. The first one being career transition, which is traditionally individuals who are already within federal service. You have individuals who are competitive service, again, another kind of federal designation. You have individuals with disability, very obvious. And then special authorities. I'm not really entirely certain what that one is. And then you have veterans. And so what this means is that if you were to apply and you did not meet any of those non-compete statuses, your application will not be reviewed, just very simply. But as you can see here, students and recent grads are, they comprise 13 that must be 18 opportunities because I think that is a 6 and that looks like a 12. So basic math brought to you by me, Associate Director of Career Development. So with those, you would check on whatever box specifically applies to you. So students, recent grads, and then that will filter out all the results that do not include that as one of the hiring paths. What I will typically do when I'm looking for a position, I will click on the specific hiring paths with which I, am specifically non-compete for. And then I will also hit open to public just to make sure that if there are any positions that I'm overlooking, are still going to end up in that. Like there might be a program analyst position that is just basically open to everybody that they're not going to look at any hiring path for. And so with that in mind, I just make sure that I'm covering all my bases that way. Just make sure that, I'm able to see what all is available. You can do filter out kind of it based on a salary range. What I would suggest though is focusing on general schedule versus salary range. Like I said before, they're going to be pretty outlandish scales for this. They might say, oh yes, 65,000 to 175,000. You don't necessarily want to say put in 100,000 because that's what you're hoping to get in an entry level position, and then end up excluding all of the opportunities that would likely be afforded to you, or get a whole bunch of positions that are like GS 12, 13, 14, 15, when you are only currently eligible for a GS 7 or GS 9. And so if you scroll down further, you will see other additional filters for looking at specific departments, looking at specific offices and agencies. Up at the top left here, you'll see you can sign up for email alerts. The Safe Search function is very outstanding, and I would suggest not overlooking it. This is a good way to make sure that if there's not a current opportunity available for an agency or an office that you're interested in, that you will be notified when it is first dropped. Occasionally, some of the different departments and agencies will have very short timelines. Like the Department of State famously will use like a 4-day window for some of their applications, for some of their kind of just general administration positions. And so to be able to make sure that you are able to meet that deadline, you're going to want to make sure you store a couple of resumes, which I'll cover in a second. Also, you're going to want to make sure you apply earlier versus later, because the first thing that will review it is the computer. If you make it past that phase and get referred, you don't necessarily want to be at the bottom of the pile. You want to make sure that you aren't going to have any impacts of like reviewer fatigue or anything like that. So my suggestion is as soon as you see an application is available, apply for it with a tailored resume, as tailored as you can make it. And that way you're just putting your best foot forward, making sure that, you are, hopefully getting in there early enough that reviewer fatigue won't have a major issue on this. There are occasionally quotas for some of these, like the only first 150 applicants will be considered. In those circumstances, it also makes it your best interest to apply as early as possible, because then you were not going to be excluded because you didn't get you had the 150 first application. Okay, so reading a vacancy announcement, the reason there's so much text on the page right now is because it is very important that you read everything in the application and really kind of understand and interpret it well. Because if you overlook something in the qualifications and evaluations, you will have spent, say, 2 to 3 hours applying for a position that you might not qualify for. For the benefits and other info, this is really just going to inform you of what perks and benefits might be available to you. And then the how to apply is absolutely critical to review. What I've seen in the past year is that a lot of the opportunities that are made available through USA Jobs will include things that say resumes over 5 pages long will be excluded from the search or will not be considered. And so if there is critical information like that, and you have, say, the tag of your text just bleeds over into the 6th page just a little bit, that is going to be considered a 6-page resume, and you will be excluded from the search. So you just want to make sure that you're reviewing this stuff as succinctly, as significantly as you can. In terms of how you really tailor your resume, you're focusing on the overview and the duties in that position. Sometimes they will have a very good level of detail regarding the duties responsible for this position, or duties and responsibilities for this position. Sometimes they will not. They might be much more vague about it because there is either top secret level clearance required, or it is a mission specific or mission critical kind of detail, and they're not willing to share that publicly. If that is the case, you have to do a little bit of interpretation. So if it is program analyst for whatever security agency, and you are like, okay, well, what do I need to do to tailor my resume? So it's a security agency, so subject matter expertise, you're going to want to have national security or intelligence kind of subject matter expertise in the resume. If it's an analyst position, you're going to want to make sure that you mention analysis somewhere in your application, as well as kind of like program management, because the vast majority of positions within federal service are going to be program focused, project focused. And so what's your ability to manage a budget? What's your ability to kind of, provide surveys and interpret that data? What's your ability to work and coordinate and communicate effectively with other stakeholders, interagency stakeholders, extra agency stakeholders like contractors? And so essentially just kind of interpreting based on the title as well as the organization name to really kind of interpret what you need to be putting into your resume. Qualifications and yeah, we already covered that. Okay. So just looking at a policy analyst position very briefly, this is with the Department of Treasury, and the salary range here is 65,000 to 102,000, GS scale of 9 to 11. So generally speaking, like I said before, these can sometimes get a bit outlandish, but it is a safe bet to assume that you're going to get somewhere in the bottom 10% of what this range is. This is open to the public, and specifically, this tells you the summary here. Tells you which office you are specifically working with. This gives a great level of detail regarding what the position is looking for. And so one vacancy in the following location, Washington, D.C. Occasionally, if it's just kind of an open or rolling application, it might say various locations and then list specific ones. Or it just might say various locations and leave it at that and say it's basically anywhere. So this is going to be kind of important to understand. It's like, okay, am I applying for a position that would basically just say, what are your preferences? We're going to send you to maybe one of those five. But the duties in here are kind of very well laid out. You're going to be ensuring timely progression, effective monitoring, and compliance of cases in coordination with Treasury staff, interagency, and parties to transactions, which is a bit of a vague statement, I will grant you, but you're ensuring essentially that programs are effectively monitored and move forward. So just kind of making sure that you're understanding and interpreting kind of like what some of these bullet points might be saying, even if they are kind of vague like that. So qualifications, this is an open continuous announcement with the following cut dates to review application packages. And what this essentially is saying is effectively that there are going to be multiple searches until they find their person. And so until they find their person, these are specifically the cutoff dates for each application. What I would suggest is if you are, say, looking at applying at 12:30 on December 30th versus, any other time, it might be to your advantage to wait until the next row of applications. It really depends a little bit on luck here, but I mean, if you're also just like, you know what, I'm gonna, give it my shot. I'm gonna see what happens. Then you can do that as well. But this is the conditions of employment, and then you can see kind of like what the specific qualifications are down below here, and then just making sure that you're meeting those experiences. Like it says here, specialized experience with the GS11. Essentially, what this is saying is that to be considered for the GS11, you need some of these down below, and that's mainly kind of what you need to focus on. Otherwise, specialized experience with the GS9 level, it's going to be inclusive of that. And then going forward here, selective service. If you're a male and you have not signed up for selective service, be sure that you do. If you have not registered and choose not to register, then you will not be considered for federal position. But I mean, they have a very helpful link here that essentially links you directly to it. And essentially, you're just entering your information into that system. Once that's complete, you'll have you'll be in the system, so you don't necessarily have to bring proof that you've been signed up for selective service or anything like that. Okay. And then down here, you can see kind of what the 11 paid holidays, 13 days of sick leave, and 13 to 26 days of vacation time each year. So this is just the general kind of like benefits. In terms of how they determine whether or not you get 13 or 26, it likely has to do kind of like with your amount of experience, as well as kind of like what you would be at either GS9 or GS 11. And so there's probably a number of other different impacts that would, or sorry, there are a number of other things that would impact that as well. Oh, and so this is kind of what I was saying before. In terms of required documents, please limit your resume to 5 pages. If more than 5 pages are submitted, your resume will still be accepted. However, only the first 5 pages will be reviewed. I have seen other applications basically say any application with 5 pages or more will not be considered. So it's just important to make sure that you're reviewing this and making sure that you're not leaving out critical information. Like if there's a technical skill requirement for this position, your technical skills are at the very bottom of your resume, and that's on page 6, then that's going to be a misstep, right? Okay. So building your federal resume, there is a very helpful resume builder through USA Jobs. And essentially this is your landing page. This is the landing page. Nope. This is your landing page. And this is what happens if you click on documents. It will take you to this page. You can upload a total of 5 resumes. And generally speaking, you're going to be applying to the same types of positions. And so for the most part, it's not a bad idea to have kind of like, this is my program analyst resume. This is my intelligence analyst resume. This is my project manager resume. And just have those different kind of levels to make sure that you're able to effectively apply pretty quickly to whatever position you're most interested in. Do not include on the resume your social security information, other kind of like very personally identifiable information. Photos of yourself just in a general American context, bad idea. And then this other information is to basically make sure that there's no bias introduced into the resume or to the reviewers as they're reviewing these resumes. But yeah, so it's a pretty easy process to get started. Federal resumes require more detail than your standard resumes. And so you might find with some of the bullet points, you're over describing your responsibilities, or at least you're reiterating them far more. So if one of the positions that you had in the past, whether or not it would really kind of apply to whatever you're applying or what you're looking at getting into, who knows? But say you were an event planning, you were an event planner for an organization before, started to apply to federal positions. If the federal position you're applying to is event planning related, you're going to want to make sure you're saying more than just planned events for this specific function. You want to say planned wedding. You want to say, designed marketing for event management, coordinated with events planning teams, designed 5,000 person attended events, different things like that to make sure that you're really kind of showcasing the full breadth of just kind of like what you're able to do. 1 to 5 pages in length. We just kind of talked about that. These are going to require far more detail. So having 5-page resume is not, in this case, bad. You want to make sure, again, that you're reviewing the job vacancy very carefully to make sure that you're not missing anything, as well as just really taking the details from the duties and responsibilities section to really customize the resume to that kind of field of positions, to that type of role. Okay, so these are just to kind of give you an idea of kind of what sections you can expect in this. So candidate information, obviously your contact information, your work experience, that's going to be your professional roles. Some things to keep in mind with work experience are going to be that you're going to want to include the supervisor name, as well as your salary information. If it's an unpaid internship, you're just going to put 0.0, $0.0. And it's just, that's going to be some of the required things to add in there. The reason you're entering your supervisor information in there, your current supervisor or past supervisor information in there, is for employment verification. This is not your list of references. If they ask for a list of references, that's likely to be at the end of the process versus, say, at the very beginning. And so just keep some of that stuff in mind. Education's very obvious. References, there will likely be a section like that. I guess what I will do is I will amend my statement before. If you do include references for these different kind of positions, the main point I would make here is notify them once you've made it to like the interviewing portion. You don't need to let them know every time you apply to a federal position. Unfortunately, people aren't referred that frequently. So about 10% of applications end up turning into interviews. That said, it takes about 82 to 85 applications before you get a federal position on any kind of like standard year. So keep that in mind. So you just don't want to overwhelm your references by saying, hey, I applied to another one. Hey, I applied to another one. You just want to make sure that they are aware that, once you get to a point where they might likely be contacted for, say, a federal reference, that they are aware at that point. And certainly you are hopefully making them aware that you are adding them as references at the beginning of this process versus, say, right before they're contacted. And then affiliations, this could be different associations you're a part of, different kind of conferences that you have joined, those different kind of things. And then desired locations. This would be as if you want to go to, if you want to end up in a specific state or a specific region on those applications that say, various locations, and they list a whole smattering of them. They are likely to try to get you to one of your preferences, but there's a reality here where they might just say, you're going to be lucky to get what you get. And so that's something to keep in mind with some of those preferences. So prepare for the assessments. Essentially, there is also going to be an assessment, a questionnaire that you have to fill out for a lot of these applications. There's going to be 25 to 125 questions. I've never seen a 125 questionnaire, but they do exist. Typically, I think it's between, say, 50 and 75. I think that's going to be kind of like your safe bet. But this is to qualify what you put in your resume, or at least cross-check what you have in your resume. And so if you say in the questionnaire, I have 5 years experience using Excel for a professional position, but in your resume, it only dictates 3 years. That's going to be seen as a discrepancy and it will throw out the application. So that's going to be kind of where you're wanting to make sure that these things lock up pretty tight, and just make sure that you're showcasing kind of like what all is available. Yeah, and so you can also preview the questions using the link found in the job vacancy announcement, just to kind of get a sense of what will be asked. And then you can also just kind of double check through your resume. It's like, where is this reference? Where is this reference? Just to make sure that, that stuff is going to match up fairly well. There's occasionally going to be a requirement for a KSA as well. This is not a cover letter. This is a cover letter adjacent. Essentially, it's talking about specific knowledge, skills, or abilities that are necessary for this role. So they want to make sure that before they really kind of consider who they want to interview, what is specialized experience, knowledge, skills, or abilities that ties this person to this position. So typically half page to a full page in length. And you're wanting to make sure that you're using the specific keywords and phrases mentioned in the job duties or the overall the summary to make sure that you're using kind of substantive examples to showcase how you've done that before, so that when the people look at this, they're like, oh yeah, go, you can do this again. And then cover letters. Now, you don't have to submit a cover letter for the vast majority of these federal opportunities, but it does give you another opportunity to kind of display your substantive experiences as they relate to the job duties and responsibilities. So it's not a bad idea. It also showcases another level of your writing ability, which within federal communication, writing and, just communication in general, written communication is going to be a very important skill to have. Stay on top of your application. Don't just go drop it off and say, okay, I'll never see you again. You can track your status using the application manager, which if we scroll on back to here, where it says not referred, this is before I applied to this position. So that's just to this position at the Charles School. So if Dwayne watches this later, that's the main reason. But this will tell you kind of where you are in the process. If it says not referred, then obviously that's the end of that application. If it says referred, that will generally mean that you have been referred to the individuals who are reviewing the overall resumes and everything. And then once that has been completed, they will, determine who they want to interview based on that pool of candidates. And it might even say interview request. There's a whole bunch of different things that this will say, but it will help you keep on track on top of the overall application. With agency websites, with some of those different application processes, I'm sure if you've ever called them, there is likely in that phone tree or the call tree something in effect of, if you're calling about your application, just know that we are reviewing it, and please do not contact us further about this or something to that degree. But typically with any USA job application or any of these different applications, once you make it past the referred phase, they might give you a point of contact, or just on the bottom of the job application, there might be a point of contact at the bottom there. If it's been, say, 2 or 3 weeks and you've heard nothing, it's like 2 or 3 weeks past the deadline, it's not a bad idea to submit an email, and I would just use one sentence to basically say, hey, I'm following up on my application regarding this specific position. I just wanted to know if the review is still occurring. Something to that effect, to just double check, is this something I should kind of move away from or move on from, or should I still kind of, keep an eye on what's happening. That's going to help you in terms of moving forward with the application, just kind of understanding where you're at in the overall process. So after you've submitted the application, say you do end up getting referred, and then you end up finally getting invited to interview. Essentially, once you've been referred, the agency is going to evaluate the candidates in that pool to really determine who they want to interview. Once they have done that, they will produce that list of qualified candidates, and they will select those individuals for interviews that they want to. Typically, if, say, there are 300 people who submit an application and they reviewed 50 of those applicants, they're likely not going to reach out to more than 10 people for one position. The general idea here is that, how many human resources are you willing to dedicate to one specific position? And by adding in 15, 20 candidates for one single role, you're talking about, especially for like screening calls plus, full, panel interviews, you're talking about dozens of hours of human resources that are being applied to one single role. So do you want to do that? So generally speaking, you can expect, they're very smaller pool of candidates for that first round of interviews for the screening call. And then it's just going to be like any other kind of interview process. Anytime you've done an interview for whatever organization, whatever department, whatever store, whatever restaurant, anything like that, it's going to be very similar. You're going to have your interview, screening call, your panel interview. and then likely a final call with whatever human resources person to really kind of say, you know, what are the next steps. And then they'll select the best candidate or candidates for the position, depending on how many opportunities are available. So if it requires security clearance, it is important to know that that process is you're going to receive an offer contingent upon successful completion of background check or successful clearance process. Sorry, not or, and successful completion of clearance process. So in those circumstances, that can be anywhere from, say, 30 days, depending on level of clearance, to 180 days to a full year. It depends fully on kind of your background and kind of the relationships you have. And if you are interested in talking more about security clearance, we are doing a security clearance webinar a couple of weeks from now. So just kind of keep your eye on the jobs email if that's where you find this one, just to kind of be apprised of when that's going to be. So that's everything I got for you regarding the overall interview, and sorry, the overall federal job applications kind of strategies and some of the different things to kind of keep in mind. With that in mind, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any kind of thoughts? And actually, before you do so, I'm just going to go ahead and sign out of the recording. First, I want to say thank you so much for paying attention and being a part of this webinar. I hope you were well informed, and I hope you took a lot away from this. So my name is Brian Barr, the Associate Director of Career Development. If you have any questions, you can always feel free to email me at the email listed on the page here. Otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week.
Thanks, Brian.